and thank you so much for taking time to join today. Like Toba said, my name is Shay, and I work with the data protection team here at Paystack. Um, and yeah, once again, thanks for taking the time to join. So, as you may all be aware, data protection is becoming a very, very hot topic for businesses globally. And if you're not compliant, it could have very, very dire consequences for your business, and also for how customers see you and your business. So the reason for this webinar is to just guide you through some best practices to keep in mind as you navigate and grow your business. So very briefly, I will just go through the topics that we'll be covering today. There's a brief introduction, and then data protection rules for your business, what you should absolutely be doing. And then we'll cover third-party risk management, data breach management, and then we'll look at some helpful resources. And then we'll have a Q&A section. All right, let's get started. So I mentioned data protection earlier, but I don't even know that everybody knows what that is. So I just thought to run through some quick definitions before we start. So data protection refers to the practices, laws, and regulations which are designed to protect personal data from unauthorized access, misuse, or disclosure. So when you say practices can include having a privacy policy on your website. It can include signing a data protection agreement with your partners. It can include having an internal audit to see where your privacy program is at. And then for laws and regulations, that's pretty straightforward. So laws and regulations include laws that have been put in place by supervisory authorities in your country to guard data protection practices. So that could include the NDPA for Nigeria, the Ghana Data Protection Act for Ghana, the Data Protection Act for Kenya, and also the GDPR, which I'm sure we've all heard about. Okay, so moving on. What is personal data and who is a data subject? So personal data refers to any information that can be used to identify an individual. That could be name, email address, IP address, home address, passport number, like anything that once you see it, you can use it to identify an individual. That is personal data. And a data subject is an individual who can be identified using that personal data. All right, so moving on to why data protection is important. So just a brief background, data protection is rooted in an individual's right to privacy, which is in the constitution of, I guess, almost every country in the world, if not all. But data protection is rooted in the right to an individual to have their own privacy. And so it's a legal obligation on businesses to protect the data that they collect. So if you collect personal data as a business, you must make sure that you're protecting it. Data protection is also important because having a robust data protection practice in your business will build customer trust. So if customers see you as a business that will protect their data, they'll trust you and your business will advance because you get more customers, people will be more comfortable to use your services, and you also get a competitive edge compared to businesses who don't have a well-established privacy program. And just to mention that Paystack, of course, is absolutely committed to securing your data. And if you'd like to know more about the ways that we do that, you can go to paystack.com/security to see just our entire suite of certifications and the ways in which we secure your data. Okay, so jumping into the best practices for your business. The first is when you're collecting customer data, make sure that you have a valid and legal reason for collecting it, and also be transparent about how you use it. So depending on your business, what would be the valid or legal reason may be different. So say that I have a an e-commerce website where I sell shoes. My reason for collecting data would be so that I can fulfill orders. So like I would need your name, your email address, your home address to be able to deliver the goods to you. So just in general, processing can be based on different grounds, including consent, legal obligation, contracts. I think those are the most common grounds for processing. So to the second part, that says you should also be transparent about how you use the data. That means that when you are collecting data, you must make sure to say, okay, I'm collecting your data because you've ordered this thing from me and I need to be able to deliver it. So just is very good practice to make it clear why you are collecting data. And most businesses would usually do that using a privacy policy. So such that customers can go to the privacy policy, see the data that you're collecting, see how you use the data, see how long you retain it, and so on. All right, so moving on to the second point. Use the data you've collected only for the reasons you stated when collecting it and for nothing else. So if in your privacy policy, you say that you're collecting data to be able to fulfill orders for shoes or whatever it is that you're selling, you shouldn't then take that data and sell it to a third party or sell it to like a loan company who then starts harassing your customers with emails, and then your customers will be wondering how the loan company got their information. So when you're collecting data, when you're processing data, make sure that you're only using it for the reasons you stated and for nothing else, because that is best practice. Right, so the third point, collect only the absolutely necessary data. So don't collect data because you think you might need it in the future. Collect data that is relevant to the purpose for which you're processing that data. So back to the example that I gave earlier, or just a different example, if I had a website that sells electronic travel guides, like a guide to Accra or to Lagos or something like that, I don't need to be asking my customers for their fingerprints or even their home addresses because I don't need it. Since all they have to do is place an order on my platform, pay using Paystack, and then I email them their travel guides, I do not need any extra data other than that. To the fourth point, after you've collected the data, you also have to regularly check and update it to make sure that it's accurate and up to date. So say for instance, you run a monthly subscription business that delivers a mystery package to people monthly. You want to periodically make sure that the customer's delivery address is up to date. If not, it may create some operational difficulties for you and your business. So you must make sure that you have a mechanism in place as well for you to reach out to customers or for customers to be able to reach out to you to say, oh, hey, I've changed my address. So please update my address on your systems. All right. So moving on to the next point, do not keep customer data for longer than you need it. There can be a tendency to just hold on to data even when you're no longer using it for whatever reason. But that is not the best course of action. That's not good practice, because the longer you keep it, the more you put yourself at risk of a data breach or of not being compliant with regulations. Because according to the law, you are not supposed to just hold on to customer data indefinitely. Once you no longer have a reason for holding on to it, you should find a way to safely dispose of it. So for these points, determining how long you will keep customer data will depend on several factors, such as the nature of your business and also applicable laws. So for instance, if you collect KYC data, you will probably need to keep it longer than you would employee data, or for longer than you would need to keep data for people who apply to jobs in your company. So just keep in mind that you shouldn't keep data for longer than you need it once there's no business need, once there's no purpose for you keeping it, you should safely dispose of it. So to the sixth point, do protect data from unauthorized access, loss, or destruction. And this refers to using security measures to keep data safe. And this will be different depending on the nature of your business and the type of data that you are handling. But if you run a business, just make sure that your employees use very strong passwords, use multi-factor authentication, just so that unauthorized people can't have access to the data through your employees. All right, so to the seventh point, respect customers' rights regarding their data. So this just means that you must have a process in place for your customers to be able to exercise their rights as data subjects. And those rights can be erasure, like your customers can reach out to you to ask you to erase their data. They can reach out to say they want you to correct the data that you're holding. They can reach out to say that they want you to transfer their data to another processor. They can reach out to you to say that they no longer want you to process their data. But in any case, you must make sure that you have a process for data subjects to be able to reach you about their data. All right. So to the last point now, make sure that you maintain documentation to demonstrate your compliance. This just refers to keeping records of your compliance with data protection laws. Again, this will depend on the kind of business that you run, but in general, these records can include logs showing that your customers had consented to direct marketing, for instance, or they had consented to you processing their data, or it could be a record of all the processing activities that you undertake in your business. But just make sure that you're keeping records and you're maintaining documentation that shows that you're compliant with the data protection laws that apply to your business. All right, so moving on to the next slide. Okay, so third-party risk management. Unfortunately, no business is an island and no business is self-sufficient. So more often than not, you will need to reach out to third parties to be able to offer products or services to your customers. So a third party can be a payment processor like Paystack, or just general service providers such as companies that handle customer support and so on. Third parties can also include integrations such as Shopify and WooCommerce. And when you're engaging third parties, it's very important that you only work with third parties that won't harm your business down the line. So the quote at the bottom of the screen says a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So even if you have the strongest privacy program in the world, but you engage a payment processor who is, for instance, processing card payments without being PCI DSS certified, that could harm your business because if there's a breach on the payment processor side, the financial information of your customers could then become public, and that would definitely harm your business. So when engaging third parties, the first thing to do is research. Like Google is actually your friend. You can Google, see what's in the news about the third parties. You can see if they've been in the news for anything negative, if they've had any breaches, if people have called them out on social media for not having good privacy practices. You'll be able to see that. So start by doing your research. Also, make sure you do your due diligence. Ask questions. Ask them if they have a privacy program. Ask them if they have a privacy notice on their website. Ask them if they've been audited, if they file their NDPR audits, if you're in Nigeria, for instance, and so on. And just make sure that they have a robust privacy program, as well as good security practices to protect your customers' data. Also, you want to make sure that you have contracts in place just to protect yourself in case anything goes wrong. So contracts here can range from NDAs in the early stages of the engagement to a service agreement and then to a data processing agreement that will speak to your roles and responsibilities as a controller and processor of data. And then for compliance obligations, just make sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. Make sure that over the years, the third party has been compliant with all their obligations in whatever territory they might be in, and that they're in good standing with regulators. And then make sure that on a periodic basis, you are auditing your relationship with the third parties. So just to make sure that everything that's in the agreement is being adhered to. So they're not processing data outside of your instructions. They're not doing anything that could come back to harm your business. And for third-party risk management, the extent of your engagement will depend on the service that is being rendered. So for instance, if you are engaging a vendor to mow the lawn in your office, the requirements would of course be a lot less stringent than if you're engaging a third-party organization to say process payments on your behalf or manage your customer service operations. But in all cases, just make sure that you do your research and your due diligence before engaging third parties, because whatever they do can have an impact on your business. All right, moving on to data breach management. So for data breaches, it's usually a matter of when and not if, because sometimes it is just what it is. And no matter how great your privacy program is, you might still experience a data breach, whether minimal or very significant. But it's not the end of the world. In fact, it's probably a good thing so that you learn from it. But in the case of breaches, you must act fast. So depending on the severity of the breach and whether there's a high risk or a risk to the rights and freedoms of the data subjects, you may or may not need to report to the supervisory authority in your country. But if you do, that will usually have to be done within 72 hours. So that's something to note. Secondly, you want to identify the source of the breach and plug it as soon as possible. And sometimes it could just be as easy as revoking access to like a Google Doc or something that contains personal data. But depending on the severity, you may be able to plug it immediately, or it might take a few days. But whatever the case may be, you definitely want to identify the source of the breach and make sure that you're doing everything to stop it before you move on. And then, like I said, if necessary, you will need to inform necessary stakeholders such as law enforcement or even your service providers like Paystack. So if you happen to have a breach that could affect us, you will need to inform us, as stated in the agreements that you would have signed. And in some cases, you may need to inform data subjects, especially if they would need to change their credentials, if they would need to change their passwords, if they need to call their banks to block a card, something like that. So that's something to note because it's very important as well. And then the next step is to investigate, remediate, and monitor. So you have to investigate what may have caused the breach. Was it a vulnerability? Was it human error? And so on. And then based on your investigations, you'll be able to say, okay, this is how we're going to solve this problem. So you remediate and you monitor over the next few days, and I guess permanently, because monitoring is ongoing, to make sure that your fix is working and the breach does not reoccur. And of course, you want to document and keep the information privileged. So documentation is very necessary for compliance reasons, because if for instance, it's a huge breach and people are talking about it on social media, and then your regulator reaches out to say, oh, what's going on, and then you don't have anything documented, that will definitely count against you. And when you document, make sure that not everyone in your company even has access to it. So only the concerned parties should have access to that information. And then, of course, once you've been able to stop the breach and remediate the vulnerability that led to it, you make sure that going forward, you learn from it and that same thing doesn't happen again. So that could include changing your service providers, switching to like a cloud-based service versus personal servers. That could be anything based on the type of business that you have. But it's very important that you learn from your mistakes or from your vulnerabilities so that they don't happen again. And we're almost through. So the data protection team at Paystack has put together a frequently asked questions page where you can go and just see the questions see general privacy questions and our answers to them. Toba, can you post in the chat, please, just so that people can think. All right, so you can visit the page and just read through. And of course, if you have any data protection questions or queries, you can reach out to the privacy team at dpo@paystack.com. And if you have any general questions or queries, you can reach out to support@paystack.com or hello@paystack.com. All right, so we've come to the end of the webinar, but we're going to open the floor for questions now. Or if you'd like to share your own unique challenges or experiences as well, please feel free to do so. Thank you.
We had sort of reached out to a few of our merchants and asked if they had a few questions, and I think we have one or two here. So I'm just going to ask those questions now. And so the first question is, can a small business be exempt, or does a small business have to follow all the data protection regulations?
So no, small businesses are not exempt. So all businesses, regardless of your size, you must comply with applicable data protection regulations. But what might be different based on whether you're a small business or a large business might be the scope and complexity of your compliance. So say for instance, I run a roadside shop where I sell snacks. And every time a customer comes, I ask them to provide their name and number so that if I'm having a promo, I can reach out to them. That's very small compared to, say, a payment company that is operating in 10 countries, or an e-commerce company. We can think about Amazon or Jumia. So yeah, as a small business, you are not exempt. You must find out which parts of the laws apply to you, and you must make sure that you're compliant.
All right, awesome sauce. Thank you. Another question that we have is, I guess there was just someone needed clarity around what counts as personal data. I think that might be a little confusing for some people. I think there's personal data for businesses. That's interesting. So what I mean personal data is, my data is personal to me. So as a business, how does that concern me? What does personal data mean? Yeah.
So personal data only relates to human beings. So as a company, you do not have any personal data. So just to recap, personal data is any information that is related to you as an individual and that can be used to identify you either directly or indirectly. So that can be anything from your name to your email address, even to a picture of you, and your bank details, your IP address, and a lot more. But what you must know is just that personal data applies to identifiable human beings or individuals. So as a company itself cannot have personal data because a company is just an entity under the law and not a natural person.
Okay. We have a few questions from the chat. Um, we have one from or let's start with Jonathan Hassan, who asked that what is the best way of documenting data?
Okay, so I'm going to take this to mean what's the best way of documenting your data protection compliance activities. And I would say that you can start with your policies. It depends on what kind of data you're trying to document. Sorry, this question is a bit vague, but I will try to answer. So to show compliance, which I imagine that's what you're referring to. Compliance documentation can include your records of processing activities, which is basically something that details every instance where your company processes personal data. And the reason for that is to have a clear overview of all the ways that you're processing data, to see how the data flows through your company. So that would be one. Another way of documenting is by keeping records of data protection impact assessments. So a DPIA is like an assessment that you do before you launch a product, or before you process data in a new way, or before you launch a new technology into your business. And it basically assesses the possible risks that could arise from that processing activity. So keeping records of that shows a regulator, for instance, that you've thought about everything that could go wrong before, like offering a new product, before launching a new way of processing. So that's another example of accountability documentation. And also your internal policies and procedures. Documenting your internal policies and procedures also shows that you are being accountable under data protection legislation. So just keeping records of all those things will show a regulator that you are compliant.
Next up, we have Emmanuel Anum, who asked that can a guest house be taken as a small business? I guess we can just expand into what does constitute a small business. I don't know if that's for us to answer.
Yeah, I think that's under corporate law, to be honest. So, but as far as I know, what constitutes a small business is not based on physical size, is based on, I think, revenue. So okay. So from a data protection perspective, whether you're a small business or not, it doesn't depend on your physical size. It depends on the volume and scope of data that you're processing. So I could have a big company that maybe processes data for like 5 people, even though I have a big building with 10 floors, and you could have a small guest house that processes data of like 5,000 people weekly. And that small guest house wouldn't be seen as a small business when it comes to data protection. But mine could be because I'm not processing that much data. Or for me, processing data is not a big part of my day-to-day operations. So what would count as a small versus big business would depend really on the volume, complexity, scope of the data that's being processed by the business.
But I have one more question, which is essentially what are some of the consequences of not complying with data protection laws?
So obviously, not complying means being in breach of a law, which will come with its own fines, or which will come with its own fines based on your countries, based on the country that you're operating in. So there could be legal and financial penalties, or your license could be revoked depending on your type of business. And of course, there's damage to your company's reputation. So if people go on social media and say, oh, wow, Toba Nigeria Limited is not compliant with data protection laws, then instantly customers are going to think, oh, if I give this business my data, I will regret it because, yeah, anything can happen. Yeah, so damage to your company's reputation, and that would lead to customer trust, of course. And yeah, it would be very disruptive for your business, and you could wind up losing money. So the consequences are usually very far-reaching. So it's very important that you do your best to comply with the laws that apply to you.
Alrighty. One more. Yes, everyone will send you the presentations. Um, the last one is what's the way for a business that does not have a compliance team or like an entire structure in place? How can they be compliant with data protection laws?
If you don't have a compliance team, okay, I think this is actually related to the question that just came in, which is what is the role of DPCOs and do we need to engage their services in order to become compliant? If you don't have a compliance team, you still need to somehow understand your obligations because ignorance of the law is no excuse. So you don't necessarily need to have a compliance team, but you should work with a DPCO, for instance, or a law firm with experience in privacy to make sure that you understand. Because, well, I think I want to say you as an everyday person, I don't know that you can pick up the NDPA, read it, and then be able to 100% apply that to your business. It could be tedious, and if you don't have a legal background, if you don't have a privacy background, there are lots of things that you could be missing. So even if you don't have a compliance team, I would suggest working with a data protection compliance organization or a law firm specializing in privacy to figure out what your requirements are under the applicable laws and applying them.
Awesome sauce. We have one question. Why is simple data such as my name so valuable that it needs protection?
Would you not want your name to be protected? Again, like I said at the beginning, data privacy is rooted in the right to privacy of the individual, which is in all the constitutions in the world, as far as I'm aware. So your name is valuable because once I know your name, I can know almost everything about you, and I don't think you would want that. I was just going to say thanks everyone for taking the time to join, and I hope that this webinar will be the start of you really putting in place very robust privacy practices in your businesses. Thank you.
All right, that's all, folks. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day and happy holidays.